Air Kiss, a running on-air novella by L.H. Cosway. Copyright 2019 L.H. Cosway. Read by Stacey Holmes and Will M. Watt. 1. Leanne. "I've never seen you this nervous," Paul commented as he ran his attentive gaze over me. "Are you sure you're feeling okay?" The bloke was my best friend, but man, sometimes I hated how perceptive he was. I thought I was doing a good job of covering my nerves. Obviously, I wasn't. "I'm fine," I told him and kept walking. We were on our way to an informal interview for an up-and-coming reality TV series, showcasing a group of freerunners from London. And yes, being that parkour was my life. I wanted to be a part of that group so badly it practically seeped from my pores. Maybe that's why I was so on edge. I couldn't remember a time when I wanted something more than this. Paul was friends with some of the guys involved, and when they contacted him in their search for people to come on board, he was kind enough to put my name forward too. That was Paul for you, always thinking of others. He was the nicest person I knew, if not a little quirky. Anyway, it was too bad we didn't have romantic chemistry because he would have made the perfect boyfriend. Paul chuckled, the sound deep and attractive. His blue eyes made a distinct contrast with his bright auburn hair. "You look like you're about to shit a brick." "Can you blame me? I'm about to meet Trevor Cross, Callum Davidson, and James Caan. They're like the holy triumvirate, the frickin' parkour gods of London. I know they're your buddies, but to me they're these elusive, mythological creatures only few have had the fortune to know." "Okay, you're building this up way too much in your head. They're just normal blokes. When you meet them, you'll see." I wasn't so sure about that. In my world, those three were spoken about but rarely seen. If you were lucky, they might show up when you were at the park one day. I'd watched them from afar several times but never had the nerve to introduce myself. They were like those obscure indie bands with cult followings, who only played secret gigs that spread through word of mouth. Or graffiti artists known solely by their name and work. They had this aura of untouchability. I shrugged as I glanced up at Paul. "Yeah, maybe." He grinned and teased as he poked me in the arm. "If anyone else knew there was such a soft centre underneath that tough exterior, you'd lose all your street cred." I poked him back with a light-hearted threat. "It's a good thing you're too much of a loyal friend to ever tell." He winked. "I'm pretty fantastic, aren't I?" I chuckled at his playfulness and focused back on where we were headed. We were meeting said holy triumvirate at a cafe on the South Bank. Paul wanted to take a taxi from the tube station to avoid being late, but I insisted on walking. I needed the extra time and fresh air to get my shit together. Unfortunately, by the time we arrived, my shit still hadn't found itself. Fortunately, I put up a good front. Paul was the only one who knew me well enough to see through it. I spotted them before they saw us, sitting at a table, chatting casually. They were just like Paul described them, 3 regular blokes. Trev Cross was fair-skinned, dark-haired and light-eyed, while James Caan was dark-skinned and dark-eyed with his hair shaved short. Then there was Callum Davidson. He had honey-brown hair, piercing green eyes, and ink covering every inch of his arms and neck. I was sure it extended to the rest of him as well, but since he was clothed, I couldn't see. More's the pity. I was a sucker for tattoos. His arms were attractively muscular and he had the cheekbones and jawline of a catwalk model. I watched as he pulled a pair of black Ray-Bans from his pocket and slid them on, shielding his eyes from the sun. He might as well have been in slow motion with Sexy Boy by Air for background music, what with all the fluttery fangirl feelings I was having. "Hey," Paul greeted as we approached, drawing the attention of the 3. All eyes came to us, and those aforementioned nerves caught in my throat. I felt like I was meeting the Queen. My hands grew clammy and my stomach flitted with butterflies. The pale, blue-eyed one stood first and pulled Paul into an enthusiastic man-hug. "Paul, good to see you," he said before turning to me. "And you must be Leanne. I've heard great things. I'm Trev." With the attention of all of them on me, I felt a wave of self-consciousness. I wore a pair of black jeans, a white t-shirt, and my favourite Asics trainers. It was what I wore most days because I was a low-maintenance sort of gal. I didn't really wear makeup and kept my hair cut short. In fact, I was pretty sure the last time I wore a dress was my 10th birthday party. Because of this, people often mistook me for a lesbian, which was a ridiculous stereotype because I had lesbian friends who were more glam than half the straight girls I knew. I shook hands with him as the next guy approached and offered his hand too. "I'm James. Paul's been telling us all about you. I'm excited that we might get to work together." He greeted me warmly and my nerves started to subside. They were nice guys, open, friendly, welcoming. All my worries had been for nothing. Just as soon as I had the thought, it was quashed by the fact that Callum Davidson sat there, surveying me from behind the dark lenses of his sunnies. His mouth formed a hostile slant. "Hello, we've not met before. I'm Leanne," I said, hoping to break the ice. His gaze dipped to my hand and then up to my face as he replied in an unimpressed voice. "Yeah, I know." Well, I guess all three of them being happy to meet me was just wishful thinking. Perhaps I should be thankful that Trev and James seemed nice. I could deal with Callum's less-than-friendly attitude. Since my day job was working at a Starbucks in Canary Wharf, I was no novice at handling egos. Those financial types were dead fussy about their coffee. I withdrew my hand and shoved it in the back pocket of my jeans, unwilling to let his hostility faze me. "My reputation precedes me, then," I joked, but it didn't make a dent in Callum's antipathy. "Please take a seat," James said, clearing his throat as though to squelch the awkward vibes. He gestured to the 2 empty places at the table. A waiter sidled over and took our drink orders, then left as swiftly as he'd arrived. "So, I guess we should get down to business," Trev said. "The 3 of us have been signed for a new reality show with Channel 4, but they want another 2 free runners to come on board. Paul was a top choice for all of us, and since he suggested you above anyone else, we feel like we can trust his judgment. This meeting is just a little get-to-know you so we can decide if we all gel together as a group." Callum quietly scoffed and I bristled. What was his problem? Trev either didn't hear it or decided to ignore him because he continued talking. "The big question is, are you both interested? It's important that you thoroughly think this through. You'll be filmed 24/7, and they'll have free rein to include details from your personal lives, so if you've got any skeletons in your closets, they're likely to come out. This isn't just about parkour. They want to show everything we do in our day." "I'm okay with that. No skeletons here," Paul said. "Yeah," I added breezily. "Me neither. Well, not unless you count that one weekend I spent with Charlie Sheen." I went on, and everyone laughed except for Callum. Perhaps dark humour wasn't his thing. I wondered if maybe he was just having a bad day, and endeavoured to break the tension by way of a compliment. I slid forward in my seat and gestured to his arms. "Wow, your tattoos are amazing. Are they all done by the same artist?" He arched a derisive brow, like I was being nosy instead of polite. "You writing a book?" I sucked in a breath as my stomach twisted with unease. Okay, I was reverting back to my original impression. It was just a dick. "Christ, Cal, don't be an arsehole." James shot me an apologetic look. Callum cast his attention to James. "What? It's none of their business." He paused and glanced back at me, assessing. "Wait, you are a girl, right? It's kinda hard to tell." Jeez. Cut me to the quick with a rusty blade, why don't you? It wasn't the insult that was particularly offensive, because I'd heard the same shit 100 times before. It just hurt coming from him. As a free runner in this city, I'd looked up to Callum Davidson, not to mention crushed on him like mental. Paul glared at him angrily in my defence. Who pissed on your cornflakes? Watch it, Sheridan. I might like you, but that doesn't mean you're in yet. Callum threw back. If this is how you talk to people, then I'm not sure I want to be in, Paul replied. Listen, can everyone just calm their tits? Trev intervened as he levelled his gaze on Callum. And Cal, try to tone down your inner dick just for the next half an hour, yeah? Can you blame me for being pissed? The show was supposed to be just the three of us. Now we're bending over backwards and letting them change the format. I'm sorry, but that's bullshit. Ah, now I got it. Callum didn't like the idea of more people coming on board. More mouths to feed, so to speak. Not to mention more people to cut in on his potential airtime. I couldn't tell if he was egotistical or insecure. Possibly both. Are you worried we'll take the shine off your apple? Or is this a money thing? I asked bluntly, never one to beat around the bush. Callum barked a hostile laugh. Honey, do you seriously think I care about you outshining me? I mean, look at me, he said and gestured to himself. Okay, that was possibly the most unattractive thing I'd ever heard from an undeniably attractive man. Wow, arrogant, I muttered under my breath. I knew Callum heard when he pulled off his sunglasses to level me with a challenging look. Damn, his eyes were far too beautiful for someone so conceited. I'm not arrogant. I'm confident. I know for a fact that I can outshine anyone who tries to come at me. I'd always been a defiant person. Some would even say stubborn. Put me under depraved methods of torture, and I'll be the very last person to break, which probably explained the next words out of my mouth. I could outshine you without even trying, honey, I said, throwing his own sarcastic endearment back at him. Now he looked at me, considering, his gaze astute. I got the sense what I just said interested him. He made a sweeping hand gesture as he replied. Go for it then. Outshine me. I scoffed. I'm pretty sure you'd have to shine first, and so far all you've done is sulk. Trev barked a laugh. She's not wrong, you've been a right moody bugger all morning. Callum narrowed his gaze. You're not my target audience, Trev. I'm shining for that blonde over there. He indicated an attractive woman sitting a few tables away. She can't take her eyes off me. He was right. She was staring at him with marked interest. It was incredibly irritating, and my urge to take him down a peg or two increased tenfold. Standing from my seat, I walked towards the banks of the Thames and with several strides jumped atop the wall that ran along it. I did a quick handstand and then completed 3 flawless backflips, the final one landing me back on the path. Several passers-by clapped at my performance and I grinned in triumph. On my return to the table, I made a show of dusting my hands as I levelled my new nemesis with a cocky look. Top that, sunshine. Parkour was the living, beating heart inside my chest. I wouldn't allow Callum Davidson to taint it for a single second, even if he was one of the sexiest men I'd ever met. Come hell or high water, I was going to be part of this show.
2. Callum. Bloody hell, she was sexy. And I wasn't talking about the leggy blonde eye-fucking me several tables away. I was referring to the petite tomboy with the peachy ass and gorgeous blue eyes. I'd resigned myself to being pissed about the TV people wanting to bring on more free runners, and since Leanne was one of those interlopers, I wasn't going to give her an easy time. I knew Trev and James thought I was just being selfish, and in a way they were right. I was selfish, and that was because I knew where the opposite got you. Nowhere. If I was going to create a better life for me and Mum, then I had to be ruthless. I didn't want her living in that shitbox apartment block any longer than necessary. We both spent way too many years there already. So yeah, I needed every penny I could get out of this TV deal, and bringing on another 2 people was going to cut into it. Just think about the polyphonic spree. There were way too many motherfuckers in that band for them to have gotten a decent cut. And remember So Solid Crew? I bet none of those bastards were living the high life right now. Top that, sunshine, Leanne said as she sauntered back over, lowered herself into a seat, and crossed one leg over the other. Too fucking cute. She was sexy and adorable and somehow tough in one completely tempting package. I'd never give her the satisfaction of knowing it, though. I was a stubborn prick like that. Judging from the firm set of her jaw, I was willing to bet she was stubborn, too. Maybe that was what I liked about her. Or maybe it was just that peachy arse. I folded my arms and flashed her a wicked grin, satisfied when the tiniest flush marked her cheeks. My grin always worked, even on women who didn't fancy me. It was my greatest weapon. I will, I replied casually, when I'm ready. Ha! That's a cop-out, she taunted. But I didn't rise to it. I would show her up when the time was right, and she'd admit I was the better free-runner willingly. Maybe we should get back to the matter at hand, said James. Yeah, I'm already sold on the fact that you two are going to suck viewers in with your rivalry, Trev chuckled. Leanne raised both eyebrows, but didn't say anything. I wondered what she thought of all this, and I thought about what Trev said. Maybe she was right. Maybe this odd rivalry between us would make for good TV. I wasn't sure why, because I didn't even know her, but there was some natural instinct in me that wanted to rub her up the wrong way. Then again, it probably just went back to the money. So, you both work at Starbucks in Canary Wharf, James said. You'll likely have to give those jobs up if you get signed. Both Paul and Leanne shot each other looks as if to say, oh no, please don't make us leave our beloved coffee slinging behind. I resisted the urge to smirk because I knew all too well how shitty it was working in the service industry. I was still an assistant manager at Urban Outfitters. Don't laugh. As soon as this TV thing was set in stone, those pricks could kiss my ass goodbye. Yeah, that's not going to be a problem, Leanne said, with a healthy dose of sarcasm. And I hated how much it made me warm up to her. Appearance-wise, she was the exact opposite of the usual girls I went out with, so the fact I was attracted to her was surprising and inconvenient. I was grumpy about them bringing more people in, but I kind of wanted to see where this whole thing went. Not to mention, I'd always liked Paul, even if he was a little too nice for his own good. Usually, when people were that nice, it meant they were up to something. I realised I'd been staring at Leanne for too long when she arched an eyebrow and shot me a questioning look. I frowned, slid my sunglasses back in place and stared at a random spot in the distance. She had nice skin. I wouldn't mind touching it. There'll also be some travel involved, James continued. We'll be in Manchester and Newcastle for the filming of several episodes. He kept talking and the conversation progressed. I didn't really take part, still mulling over the idea that maybe it wouldn't be so bad to have Paul and Leanne around. At least when I got bored, I could amuse myself by checking out Leanne's arse. So, how about we all meet for a run on Saturday? Trev suggested as we got up to leave. That way we can get a proper feel for how we work together. Sounds good to me, Paul said. Me too, Leanne added, and I was oddly looking forward to seeing her run. If those backflips she did earlier were anything to go by, she was no novice. I noticed her cast me one last contemplative glance before we parted ways. Well, that was interesting, Trev commented wryly as we headed to where he'd parked his car. I'm impressed at your ability to put a strop in front of strangers. Toddlers everywhere should look up to you in awe. Piss off, I grunted. Seriously though, James said, what was with you? You were a total arsehole to Leanne, and she was only trying to be friendly. It's not your job to give me a lecture, James, so leave it out. He just wants to know why you showed us up like that, Trev said. Leanne's a badass. My buddy Dan said he saw her running in Hyde Park one day, and she blew everyone out of the water. We're lucky to have her. Plus, we need a bird on the show so it's not a total cockfest. Great. Now they were tag-teaming me. Fine. I'll be nicer next time, I allowed. He was kind of right about the cockfest thing. See that you are, James said when we reached Trev's car. Several days went by, and when Saturday came, I had a spring in my step. I hated to admit it, but I was looking forward to seeing Leanne. With her tough exterior, pretty face, and stubborn personality, she intrigued me. I kind of liked the fact that she took my shit and gave it right back to me. You off out today? Mum asked when I emerged from the bathroom, dressed and showered. She sat by the table in the kitchen nursing a cup of tea and a smoke, which was her usual Saturday morning habit. Weekdays she left early for her shifts at the nursing home. I was determined to see the day when she didn't have to clean out bedpans just to make ends meet. Yep, heading to Crystal Palace for a run with the lads. You need me to bring anything back on my way home? She checked her cigarette box. Could you grab me a pack of ciggies? Sure. See you later, I said, and gave her a quick kiss on the temple before I headed out. I wasn't the biggest fan of her smoking, but she tried quitting several times and always went back on them. I tried encouraging her to give it another shot, but she told me sometimes you just have to leave people with their vices. I ran down the stairs, 2 at a time, grunting irritably when I saw someone left their works lying on the lobby floor. I mean, come on, kids lived here. Remembering I had a spare plastic bag in my rucksack, I pulled it out, picked up the drug paraphernalia without touching any of it, and threw it in the rubbish bin outside. See? I wasn't lying when I said this place was a shitbox. We'd all agreed to meet at the Italian Terrace in Crystal Palace Park, one of my favourite places to practice. It had a bunch of stairs and inclines to jump between, not to mention there weren't usually many people around, so you could run without being gawked at. I got there a little early, but I wasn't the only one. Leanne sat on a step staring down at her phone, oblivious to my presence. She was wearing black trousers and a dark polo shirt, which I realised was her Starbucks uniform. She must have come straight from a shift. I had a moment of indecision as I decided whether to approach her or wait for the others to arrive. Knowing it would be weird to just stand there and not say hello, I walked towards her and called out, "Nice uniform." Her finger paused on the screen of her phone and she glanced up, doll-shaped lips flattening in a straight line when she saw it was me. Obviously, she wasn't my biggest fan, and I didn't blame her. I hadn't made the best first impression. It also irritated me that I was attracted to her because the feeling clearly wasn't mutual. "Thanks. Some of us have to work for a living, pretty boy," she shot back, and I resented the assumption. "I work," I replied, and her mouth formed a smirk. "Let me guess, you're an underwear model. It must be real tiring getting snapped in designer jocks all day long." "Assistant manager at Urban Outfitters, actually," I fired back, annoyed by how defensive I sounded. Leanne barked a laugh. "No offence, but I'm not sure that's better. You sell overpriced Ramones t-shirts to 20-somethings with more money than sense." Coming from the girl who slings overpriced coffee to douchebags in suits. She laughed again, and I grudgingly appreciated the sound. "Okay, you've got me there. We're both complicit in everything that's wrong with the world. Have a seat," she said, and patted the step beside her. I sat and pulled my phone out to check the time. 10 minutes before Trev and James got here. Guess it wouldn't be so bad to have a conversation. I did need to atone for the shitty first impression I made. "Listen, I'm sorry for being a dick the other day. You didn't deserve that." She gave a casual shrug. "No worries. It'll take a lot more than a bad attitude to put me off. This TV show is the gig most of us have been waiting for. You could call me a lesbo bitch every day of the week and I still wouldn't walk away. I don't scare easily. Hold up, she was gay. Not to sound conceited, but it'd certainly explain why she wasn't giving me any interested vibes. I arched a brow. You like girls? She shook her head. Nah, it's just an assumption a lot of people make because of how I dress. She paused and chuckled. Wow, you look disappointed. Were you hoping to see me snog my hot girlfriend or something? That wasn't disappointment, she saw. It was relief. Still, I didn't correct her as I shot her a flirtatious grin. Something like that. Well, too bad. I was about to reply when Paul approached us, his smile wary. Are my eyes deceiving me? Are you two actually having a civilized conversation? I'm trying to make up for the other day, I answered, and glanced at Leanne. How am I doing? Our eyes connected and her cheeks got a hint of colour. Wait a second, was she blushing? She looked away as she replied, So far so good. Well, that's a relief, Paul said. I was worried I might have to break up some fisticuffs if you both went at it again. His wording made my mind wander. I wouldn't mind going at it with Leanne. Not at all. Hey, man. I don't hit girls. Yeah, besides, I beat his ass from here to Sunday, Leanne added cheekily. Cute. Now, why doesn't that sound like a bad thing? I replied with a lopsided grin. Again with the cheeks. She was blushing. Maybe my attraction wasn't so unreciprocated after all. Oh, please don't tell me you're one of those blokes who likes women to wear PVC and punish them with whips and chains, said Paul, feigning horror. I glanced at him, then focused on Leanne as I answered, but I don't mind a bit of roughhousing every now and again. I grinned happily when I saw how my words made her breathing shallow. She seemed relieved when Trev and James showed up. Hey, you lot, ready to get moving? Trev called as they approached. Ready as we'll ever be, Paul answered. Good to hear. We thought you and Leanne could do some freestyle stuff for us to start, and then we'll join in, James said. We want to see how you move together, then how we all move as a unit. Sounds good to me, said Leanne, as she stood and began to stretch. She drew one arm up over her head, and I swear to God she had the cutest little tricep muscles. She was small, but every part of her was in perfect shape. She stepped over to Paul, and they exchanged a few words. Then Leanne led the way as she ran up a set of steps before leaping onto a pillar. Paul followed behind her as she jumped from one pillar to the next, her execution perfectly controlled. I pulled out my phone to catch some video, thinking it would make for a good YouTube upload later. Then they reached the other side of the terrace, where there were two large Sphinx statues adorning either side of the steps. Paul climbed atop one and Leanne the other. I caught it all on camera as they shared a nod, then, in perfect synchrony, completed a backflip down onto the grass. That was fantastic! Trev enthused as he hurried over to meet them. I stood in place, frowning down at my camera as I tapped the button to end the recording. He was right. It was fantastic, they both were, but Leanne especially. She had something unique, a natural flair that you couldn't achieve through practice. I was both jealous and a little turned on, and that was why her being a part of the show was going to be a serious problem for me.
3. Leanne. Paul and I trained with Trev, James, and Callum almost every day for the next month. Aside from the odd flirtatious or intentionally antagonistic comment, Callum mostly kept his distance. And that was a good thing, especially since I didn't know how to feel about his flirting. It was difficult to tell whether he was being serious or taking the piss. Since his comment about whether or not I was a girl still niggled at me, I was inclined to believe the latter. Paul and I completed several auditions with the TV show creators, and we were subsequently approved to join the cast. We signed countless contracts and endured numerous meetings. It was a nerve-wracking time, but it would all be worth it in the end. In just 2 weeks, we were going to officially start filming, and I couldn't wait. I was so ready to show the world what I could do, what we could do, because I couldn't deny there was a special sort of chemistry when all 5 of us ran together. Not to sound corny, but it really did feel meant to be, even if I didn't know what to make of Callum sometimes. I mean, most days I was driven to distraction by his body and pretty face, but then he'd open his mouth and embarrass the living hell out of me. Tonight was James's 27th birthday, and we were heading over to his flat for a small get-together. He lived with his girlfriend, Diana, so I was interested to meet her for the first time. Paul picked me up at my flat at 7:30, and we caught the tube over to James's neighbourhood. Since it was a special occasion, I dressed up in my best pair of skinny jeans, heeled boots, and a tight black halter top. I also spruced up my hair with some product. It was as fancy as I ever got, but I was in a mood to look my best. "What did you get him?" I asked Paul as we stepped onto the lift that went up to James's flat. He was carrying a gift bag, and I was curious to know what was in there. I, personally, had gone with the old, reliable bottle of reasonably priced wine and a birthday card. "A clock," Paul answered, and I shot him a look. "You bought him a clock?" He shrugged a shoulder. "He seems like a clock sort of person." "What exactly is a clock sort of person?" "I don't know, someone like James." "That makes no sense." He cast a glance at my wine bottle. "At least I put in a little creative effort." "Hey, I've known him a month. We haven't exactly entered into the engraved cufflink stage of our friendship yet, and I wager it'll be a few years before we reach the clock stage," I went on teasingly. "Oh, go on, slag me off if you want. You'll be eating your words when you see how much he loves it." I chuckled and lifted a hand to knock on the door. It was answered by a pretty dark-haired woman in a stylish blue dress. I guessed this was Diana, the girlfriend. "Hello. You must be Paul and Leanne? Come on in," she greeted, ushering us inside. "I'm Diana, James's other half. I'm sure he's told you all about me." Paul and I exchanged a quick look, as was our habit when someone said something curious. It wasn't what she said, exactly, but more how she said it. She sounded full of herself, like James couldn't possibly help bragging to everyone about how amazing she was. "Oh yeah, he never shuts up about you," Paul answered, a blatant lie that seemed to please her. "He's such a doll," she preened as we stepped inside the living area where Trev, Callum and James sat chatting and drinking beers. "JJ just wanted a nice, quiet little party here at the flat, so I resisted the urge to invite all our friends on Facebook." Diana chuckled, and I resisted the urge to mouth a questioning JJ at Paul. Some people loved their nicknames. "Can I take your coats?" she asked, and I shrugged out of my jacket. "Hey, thanks for coming," James said when he saw us. "I see you've met my better half." "Yeah, she's gorgeous," I answered, because it wasn't a lie, though better half was debatable. "Happy birthday," I went on, handing him the wine and card. Paul greeted him next and gave him his clock, but James only set it aside to open later. I thought Paul looked a little disappointed that he wasn't going to tear it open right away. I loved how odd he was sometimes. Diana returned with a tray of drinks for everyone, and I took a glass of wine when I sensed someone's attention. Callum sat on the couch nursing a beer, eyes on me. He wore a dark shirt that fit perfectly over his muscular form. He looked sexy and gorgeous, as always, which was a big source of irritation for me. Why couldn't he just be hideous? If all went to plan, I was going to be on TV with these guys for at least the next year. Feeling horny about any one of them was a recipe for trouble. Diana perched on James's lap. Paul took a seat next to Trev, which left me with just one option, the space beside Callum. I decided I was a big girl and I could handle sitting next to him for a little while. I didn't greet him when I sat, but I could feel his eyes wandering over every inch of me. Clearly he wasn't used to seeing me dressed up. Diana started telling a story about how she surprised James with a trip to Ibiza on his birthday last year, going into detail about the beaches and the party boats and how wonderful she was as a person for organising the whole thing. I was veering towards the conclusion that Diana had far too much of the wrong sort of confidence and wondered what James saw in her. He was so kind and modest, so understated. I imagined him being with a demure librarian or a sexy, intelligent scientist lady. I didn't know what Diana did for a living, but I was willing to bet it wasn't any of those. I got a surprise when Callum bent in and murmured, "You think she installed mirrors on their bedroom ceiling so she can look at her own reflection when they fuck?" I almost spat out the mouthful of wine I just sipped, but managed to hold it down. My body shook with restrained laughter as I replied, "I have no idea, but I'm willing to take a bet on it." Callum rubbed his jaw. "How will we find out, though? One of us will need to sneak in their bedroom to see." "I nominate you." "Ah, but I could just lie to win the bet," he whispered, leaning close. His breath hit my skin, soliciting goosebumps. "No, we need to figure out a way for both of us to get in there." "We could just wait until they're too drunk to notice." He grinned, a boyish glint in his eyes. "I like your strategy. So you don't think it's true?" I just can't see James agreeing to that, even if Diana really wanted it. "You underestimate her ability to nag him into submission. Believe me, I've witnessed it firsthand." I still can't see it. He's too classy." Callum chuckled. "Okay then, you're betting no, I'm betting yes. But what does the winner get?" "A chocolate cake made from scratch by the loser," I suggested with a grin. "Too boring. The stakes need to be higher." "Chocolate is always high stakes," I argued. Callum nudged me with his shoulder. "How about the winner gets to do the loser's laundry for a month?" "Seriously, that's high stakes for you? You're really not living up to your bad boy appearance." He raised a single eyebrow. "I hate doing laundry. And what do you mean about my appearance?" I waved a hand in his general vicinity. "I thought maybe you'd want the loser to get their nipples pierced or have something embarrassing tattooed on their backside." His mouth curved into a calculating smile. "Well, now that you mention it, I'm not opposed to the idea." "That's because you've spent like 1,000,000 hours under a needle. I'm not so keen on marking this virgin skin," I said in protest. He looked surprised. "You've never gotten a tattoo?" I shook my head. His gaze turned speculative. "Scared of needles?" "I just never got round to doing it." "So you have something in mind then?" I shrugged. "I've always liked the idea of getting the solar system on the inside of my arm, but, like I said, I haven't gotten round to it." Callum leaned closer, interest marking his features. "Why the solar system?" I heaved a sigh, not too keen on exposing my inner nerd girl, but I answered him anyway. My favourite subject at school was science, but I particularly loved astronomy. Then I discovered Carl Sagan's Cosmos and I became obsessed. I even had my parents buy me a telescope for my 15th birthday. Stargazing is a huge hobby of mine." "So that's what you do when you're not jumping between rooftops?" Callum questioned, a fond note in his voice I hadn't heard before. It made me feel weird and fluttery. "Pretty much. I think it's a travesty more people don't take an interest in the universe. They're all too busy looking at their smartphones." "You look at your smartphone?" he teased. "Not as often as some people," I countered. His eyes crinkled at the edges affectionately, and again my insides went haywire. What was with him tonight? He was being so friendly. "Yeah, I guess you're right about that. But back to our bet. If I win, you have to get your tattoo of the solar system. And if I win, you have to get Leanne is the queen of everything tattooed somewhere you actually have space left. He barked a laugh at that, which solicited the attention of the others. What are you two snickering about? Paul asked. Astronomy, I answered with a straight face. Ha! That's a lie. They were talking about anal sex, it's obvious, Trev teased. You clearly don't know Leanne. She's obsessed with the planets, Paul said. I swear she gets aroused when she finds Jupiter on a telescope. Interesting, I heard Callum mutter under his breath just before Trev exclaimed, Really? You have a telescope? Can I see it? I laughed at his enthusiasm, but I was beginning to learn that was just his personality. Trevor Cross was the most excitable person I knew. Sure, come over some night and I'll show you, I said. Trev waggled his eyebrows. Some night, eh? Well, you can't exactly see the stars during the day. He made a show of looking sad, but I knew he was only playing. Damn, I thought there was a side of sexy with the invitation. I shook my head, sorry to disappoint. Well, you're both single, right? Diana interjected. There's no harm exploring the idea. Trev isn't single, Dee Dee, James said. Oh no, now he was at it too. JJ and Dee Dee. Man, I hated cutesy nicknames. He's just started dating a girl he's been friends with for years. Oh, juicy, Diana squealed, turning her attention to Trev. Tell us everything. He frowned, which wasn't something he did often, but it was only for a second. Then he plastered on a cheeky grin and replied, A gentleman never kisses and tells. Diana pouted. Boo, you're no fun. Bet's on, by the way. Callum leaned in to whisper. I gaped at him in disbelief. No way was he going to get Leanne is the queen of everything tattooed on him. It was bullshitting. He had to be. I don't believe you, I whispered back. He stared at me intently. Wait and see. With that, he stood and went into the kitchen, probably to get another beer. I stewed for several moments, then hopped up and went after him. I found him by the fridge, perusing his options. He was bent over slightly, affording me a nice view of his backside. I grew flushed and started rubbing my neck to chase it away. You need something, Leanne? Callum asked, not turning around. How had he known it was me? Suddenly, I couldn't think of a single thing to say, so I just stood there, silent. Callum exhaled and turned around, opening a bottle of Budweiser and shoving it into my hand. Here, have one of these. Thanks, I said and busied myself taking a long gulp. At the back of my mind, I knew I shouldn't mix my drinks, but I was too flustered to refuse. He popped another one open for himself and nodded behind me through the doorway, his expression sultry. Bedroom's that way. My eyes bugged and I spat out half the beer I just drank. Callum chuckled as I went to grab some paper towels to clean up the mess. You've got a dirty mind. I meant so we could find out the result of our bets. I know that, I grumbled, turning back to him as I wiped the wet from the front of my top. Luckily, it was black, so it didn't show a stain. Why'd you look so ready to bolt, then? He asked, seeming pleased with himself. I glanced at the floor, embarrassed, before shaking myself out of it. Instead of answering his question, I walked by him out of the kitchen and straight into James and Diana's bedroom. Boisterous chatter sounded from the living room, so I knew the others were occupied enough not to catch me. Stepping into the room, I discovered a pretty normal setup. King-size bed, linen sheets, dressing table and mirror by the window, built-in wardrobe by the opposite wall. Then I looked up and swore profusely. How the hell had he known? Laughter sounded from the doorway, where Callum stood leaning against the door jamb, arms folded, smug expression in place. Guess I'm the winner. I narrowed my gaze at him. You knew. He smirked and tipped the beer bottle to his mouth. Maybe. That's cheating! No, it isn't. We never made any rules about whether I'd actually been in here before. I huffed an irritable breath and looked up again. I can't believe they have a mirror on their ceiling. That's just so kinky. James is a dark horse. It's always the quiet ones, Callum said. I arched an eyebrow. If that's the case, then you must be as vanilla as they come. He feigned an offended look. Are you saying I've got a big mouth? I'm saying you talk a lot. Now he grinned. It's not a hard and fast rule, you know. I've got a few kinks. Oh, I said, hating how curious his statement made me. He crooked a finger at me. Come closer and maybe I'll show you, little one. Was he drunk or serious? I couldn't tell. If he was tipsy, he didn't look it, though that was the advantage of being a big bloke. You could hold your alcohol well. The inviting look in his eyes had a pull, but I resisted, walking towards him only to slip by and into the hallway. You're drunk, so I'll give you a pass for that one. Also, if you remember this in the morning, don't feel embarrassed. I get beer goggles all the time, too. Callum's expression hardened. Beer goggles? You know, when the alcohol makes you think you're attracted to someone you wouldn't look twice at sober. Like I said, I've been there. At this, he reached out and softly grabbed my elbow, stopping me in place. I'm not drunk, Leanne. I looked at his hand, stunned by the sizzle of attraction that ran through me. This was the first time he touched me, and the results were interesting. My belly flipped over on itself and my chest tightened. I had a sudden urge to link our fingers together, maybe stroke my open palm along his jaw just to see what it felt like. I wanted to feel the scrape of his 5 o'clock shadow. What? I croaked, throat dry. His eyes flickered back and forth between mine when he said, I'm not wearing beer goggles, so please believe me when I say this. I think you're sexy as fuck. If we didn't have to work on the show together, I'd be propositioning the hell out of you right now. I stared at him, taken aback. But you always act like I'm a nuisance. That's because you are. You're a very, very pretty, distracting nuisance. What? And back came the butterflies. Callum Davidson fancied me. What alternate dimension was this? Sure, he made a lot of suggestive comments, but I thought that was just how he acted around women. Typical flirt. But maybe that wasn't it. Maybe his flirting was simply that. Maybe he actually had a crush on me. This was certainly turning out to be an eye-opening evening. I was still digesting the information when his phone rang. He pulled it from his pocket and stepped away to answer, a smile in his voice when he said, Mum, hey, everything all right? In an instant, his demeanour changed, his shoulders tensing, body going still. Slow down. Where are you now? A pause. Okay, stay in the flat. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He glanced back at me as he shoved his phone in his pocket. Something's come up. Can you tell James and the others I had to leave? I'll fill them all in later. Sure, but, do you need any help? Is your mum okay? I asked with concern. He chewed on his lip, conflicted, then grabbed my hand and pulled me out of the flat with him. What was happening? When he spoke, his words were frantic, rushed. Actually, since you mention it, I might need your help. My mum's in a bad state and I think she'll like you. You might be better at talking her down than I am. What happened to her? I asked as we arrived outside and Callum strode towards his Ducati. Oh yeah, did I fail to mention he drove a motorbike? It was kind of hard not to notice him rocking up to all our training sessions on it. An unapologetic mix of James Dean and Jax Teller. Though I had to wonder where he got the money to afford it. Before I could question him further,
He shoved a helmet on my head. I was momentarily distracted by how it smelled like him when he studied me and asked,
"Fit okay?"
I swallowed, my stomach tightening as I nodded. He stared at me a moment, like the sight of me wearing his helmet interested him somehow, then climbed astride the bike. He revved the engine and gestured to the space directly behind him.
"Get on."
Swiftly, I did as requested. It wasn't like I hadn't imagined this scenario 1 or 20 times over the last month. I felt annoyed at my own predictability. Fancying a bloke because he drove a Ducati was just so typical.
"You'll need to hold on,"
he continued, and I awkwardly wrapped my arms around his waist. There was a brief moment when he turned his head, gave me a strange look, then focused his attention back on the bike. He revved the engine again, and we were off. As soon as he picked up some speed, I held on tighter, not surprised by how much I enjoyed being close to him. My body was a traitor like that. His smell infiltrated my senses, and since his jacket was open, I could feel his warm, hard abdomen just beneath the fabric of his shirt. I had a brief thought of licking my way across those defined muscles and got a little lost in the visual for a moment. By the time we reached our destination, I'd run through way too many fantasy scenarios in my head to be considered healthy. I climbed off the bike and Callum came and helped me remove the helmet.
"You okay?"
he asked. This new caring version of him was hard to get my head around. "Yep, all good." Now he frowned.
"My mum got into a fight with one of our neighbours. She's pretty upset about it, but I'm shit at comforting people. I always say the wrong thing. Do you think you could sit and talk to her for a while? Maybe try to calm her down while I go deal with this fucker?"
I nodded. Of course. What was the fight about? He grabbed my hand and led me inside, moving too fast for me to properly contemplate the hand-holding and how nice it felt. His palm was soft, but with a roughness around the fingertips.
"He keeps leaving his garbage in the corridor instead of carrying it downstairs to the bins, the lazy arse. It pisses everyone off because it attracts rats. Mum's been at him for months to stop doing it, but he won't listen. When she confronted him tonight, he called her a nosy slag and threatened to give her a slap if she didn't leave him alone."
Callum grunted, angrily.
"Let's see if he's so brave when he's got me to deal with."
"He sounds like a bully."
"Building's full of him. As soon as I have enough money, I'm getting his out of this dump for good."
I studied him, remembering our first meeting and how he'd been pissed about splitting the money for the show 5 ways instead of 3. Now I got why he was pissed, and my gut twisted because I empathized. I didn't like empathizing with people I thought I'd made my mind up about. I relegated Callum to the category of self-centered douchebag, but now I saw he did in fact have a heart. It softened me towards him, and I wasn't sure if I liked it. When we reached his flat, he slotted his key in the door and led me inside. The place was tiny as we stepped into the living room kitchen area. His mum sat at the table and looked to be in her mid-50s with shoulder-length brown hair and green eyes. They were the exact same shade as Callum's, except right now they were rimmed in red. There were a bunch of crumpled tissues in front of her as she shakily lifted a lit cigarette to her mouth and took a drag. "Cal, honey, you didn't need to come back."
"The fuck I didn't. I'm gonna kill that rat bastard for talking to you like that."
"Please don't. It'll only make things worse. I'll still have to pass by his flat every day on my way to work. It could make life difficult."
"He's already making life difficult by being a lazy prick. We need to show him some teeth."
Callum shot back and disappeared inside one of the bedrooms. His mum's attention fell on me and I gave a little wave. "Hey, I'm Leanne. I'm a friend of your son's." She mustered a smile. "Right, yeah. He's mentioned you. You're going to be on the TV show together?" I was surprised that he talked to his mum about me, though it was probably only in passing. "Come, have a seat," she went on, and I approached the table to pull out a chair. "Cal thinks you're fantastic. Says you ran rings around him and the lads, his mum said, again surprising the hell out of me. I had no idea he thought so highly of me and couldn't imagine him complimenting me like that, at least not to my face. Then I remembered our moment back at James's flat and felt conflicted all over again.
You're a very, very pretty distracting nuisance.
I'm Judy, by the way. Sorry I'm such a mess. I wish we could have met under better circumstances. I waved her away. Don't worry about it. I've had a few problems with shitty neighbours in my time too. Before she could reply, Callum emerged from his room with the hockey stick. Where do you think you're going with that? Judy questioned anxiously. Callum's gaze was steely.
To teach Mr. Greenall a lesson,
he answered in a hard voice, then turned and strode from the flat. Judy let out a noise of distress and I swore under my breath. I patted her on the arm and tried to be reassuring. Don't worry, I won't let him do anything stupid. Then I ran out of the flat as fast as my feet would carry me. He was halfway down the corridor by the time I caught up to him. Hey, wait up, Callum! Maybe we should leave the hockey stick out of it and talk things through the old-fashioned way. He cast me a dark look.
I'm not going to attack him so you can quit worrying. He just needs to see I mean business.
Oh, right, well, Before I could say anything else, we stopped outside the door to flat 7C, and Callum gave it several loud thumps. Seconds later, the door swung open and a greasy-looking bloke emerged, talking before he saw who it was. I swear to fuck, Judy, if that's you again! He stopped in his tracks when he clapped eyes on Callum, vicious smile in place as he held the stick over one shoulder.
You gonna give my mum a slap, are ya?
He questioned, jaw tight. Mr. Greenhorse started waving his hands in the air.
She was being hysterical. I only said that to get her to leave me alone.
Callum took a step closer so that his 6-foot frame practically dwarfed that of his neighbour.
You ever talk to her like that again and I'll give you more than a slap. You hear me, you slimy fuck?
He threatened.
Yeah, course. I'm sorry.
The man apologised, backing away inside his flat.
And if I ever see you leaving your rubbish out here again, you'll have more to worry about than a few complaints from the neighbours. I won't. I won't do it again.
The man stammered, shutting his door in our faces, obviously scared witless. When he was gone, Callum exhaled a gruff breath. He let the stick fall to his side and started walking back the way we came. I hurried to keep up with him. I didn't know whether speaking was a good idea because he still seemed on edge, so I stayed quiet. When we reached his door, he paused to glance at me.
Sorry you had to see that. I just get so fucking angry when shitheads in this building try to intimidate my mum. I'm gone a lot, so some of them think she lives alone. It pisses me off how they think they can walk all over her.
That's completely understandable. If I were you, I'd be angry too. His lips turned down at the edges, and for the first time, I saw how tired he was. Tired of struggling. Tired of living in this place.
Can you text Paul and explain why we left? I'm going to talk to Mum for a bit.
I nodded. Sure, no problem. I stood in the hallway and dialed Paul's number when Callum went into the kitchen. His voice was softer, more careful as he spoke to his mum, and I concentrated back on the ringing phone in my ear. Yeah, tonight really had been an eye-opener.
Four. Callum. I watched Leanne sitting next to Mum, talking and sharing a cup of tea like she'd known her all her life, and something about it just felt right. I liked her being here, liked having her close to me in whatever way she allowed. On her way over, with her chest pressed to my back and her arms around my waist, I'd never felt so turned on in my life. I wanted her. Badly. The last month had been nothing but a lesson in willpower. I tried to figure out what it was about her that I found so attractive. I mean, she was hot, had a great little body and a pretty face, but there was something else too. I just couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the simple fact that I couldn't have her that made me want her even more. I should get to bed, Mum said with a yawn. It was lovely to meet you, Leanne. Don't be a stranger. I won't, Leanne replied, and Mum shuffled by me, patting my shoulder as she headed for her room. As soon as we were alone, the atmosphere changed. Leanne wasn't looking at me the same as usual. There was a softness around her eyes, an affection that was the obvious result of getting a glimpse of my home life with Mum. We were all each other had since my dad did a bunk when I was still a toddler. I promised myself if I ever had a kid of my own, I'd never be like him. I like your mum, Leanne said, still sitting by the table while I remained by the door. I worried if I came any nearer I might pick her up and carry her into my bedroom. I was this close. She likes you too, I replied, my voice unexpectedly hoarse. This wasn't good. We started filming in 2 weeks. If I shagged her tonight, it'd change the entire dynamic of the group, and right now, we were on fire. When the 5 of us together, it was fluid, perfect, almost too good to be true. I wanted to keep that magic, and I didn't want to create any unnecessary vibes by having sex with my soon-to-be co-star. Up until now, I was almost certain Leanne didn't fancy me back, but the way she was looking at me tonight, I was sure if I so much as crooked a finger, she'd come. Deciding the best course of action was probably to get everything out in the open, I took the seat on the other side of the table and clasped my hands together. I looked her in the eye. You mind if we talk? She shook her head. Not at all. What's in your mind? I'm attracted to you, I said, and she sucked in a nervous breath before lowering her eyes to the table. I wished she wouldn't do that. I loved her eyes. You said that back at James's place, she muttered shyly. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. Leanne, look at me. Her gaze flicked up. I wasn't lying. If I had my way, we'd both be naked in my bedroom right now. A flush coloured her cheeks as the visual obviously got into her head. Christ, this was harder than I expected. Right, she said, embarrassed. But I don't want to fuck up the show. What the 5 of us have is too good. I know you feel it too. Yeah, it's pretty spectacular when we run, she agreed. And with that dynamic, the show is going to be amazing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I want you, and I think you kind of want me too, but we shouldn't act on it. No, I agree. Leanne nodded profusely, biting her lip. This thing between us, it'll pass. I let out a shaky breath and nodded back, hoping to convince myself she was right. Yeah, of course, so we're good, right? Let's try not to have any more weirdness between us. I just want to focus on the show. I watched as she swallowed. Me too. A pause, and she glanced at me. Those fucking eyes. So, friends? I mustered a smile, even though there was an uncomfortable twist in my gut. Yeah, friends. Just as I expected, the 5 of us were on fire when we started filming. Everyone was convinced the show was going to be a massive hit when it went to air, and I couldn't disagree. I could already visualise the swanky new flat I was going to buy as soon as the money started rolling in. Mum would be living it large in no time. No more arseholes like Mr. Greenhall to bully or push her around. Our director, Barry, had set us up with our own private gym in Shoreditch, kitted out with ramps, walls of varying heights, pillars, and even a half-pipe. It was a dream to work out in, and we were all there most days, practicing. Usually the film crew would hang about to catch footage, but they were off today since it was Sunday. I could hear someone going at it on the punching bag when I arrived and thought it was probably Trev. The bloke worked out every single day to the point of obsession. However, when I came around the corner, it wasn't Trev I saw, but Leanne. Fucking fantastic. Ever since our agreement to keep things friendly, life had been interesting. Real interesting. I swear, now that I knew she fancied me back, my attraction to her was even more out of control. The last 2 months filming had been insanely frustrating. Watching her run, work out, jump, hell, even her sweat was sexy. Somewhere along the way, my attraction became an obsession. She was all I ever thought about. I had dreams about her. When she was close, I fantasized about reaching out and touching her. "Oh, hey," she said when she noticed me standing there. She was breathless, chest heaving from her efforts on the punching bag. She wore a sports bra that cupped her tits to perfection, and a pair of workout shorts that showed every inch of her toned, shapely legs. I stared for a touch too long, transfixed. "Hey, are you the only one here?" I asked, swallowing tightly. Please say no, please say no. Trev, fitness freak that he was, had to be around somewhere. She grabbed a towel to dab the sweat from her neck. I was officially jealous of a towel. "Yeah, the others decided to go to the cinema. There's a new Jason Statham film out." "Ah, right," I replied, and turned in the direction of the locker room. "Well, I'm just going to get changed. Give a shout if you need me." She nodded. "Sure, will do." Instead of going to the locker room, I made a detour and headed straight for the showers. Once I was under the icy cold spray, I closed my eyes and thought of every unsexy thing I could imagine. Then I thought of all the reasons why having sex with Leanne was a bad idea. Stepping out of the shower, I dried off, threw on my workout clothes and headed for the halfpipe. I ran the length of it, back and forth, up and down, without even warming up. Leanne was on the treadmill, and I promised myself I wouldn't look at her. Looking at her only made things worse. In my pants. Man, this was bad. I'd been reduced to cheesy innuendos. Though if I couldn't express my desire physically, then at least I could be dirty in my own head. I glanced to the side and saw she'd stopped running to readjust some part of her sports bra. Good God. I caught sight of some side boob and tripped over my own 2 feet. My fall made a loud bang and Leanne came running over. "Cal, are you all right?" I loved how she'd started calling me Cal. I sat on my backside, inspecting the ankle I'd just busted, when she climbed onto the halfpipe, her expression concerned. "You fell," she breathed, sucking in a harsh breath when she saw the damage. My ankle was red and throbbed like a bastard. "Yeah," I said, voice strained. "But I don't think I did any permanent damage." Her pale, delicate hands lifted my trouser leg, folding it up so she could get a proper look. "It's swollen. There are some ice packs in the fridge. Stay here while I go grab one." Before I could tell her it was fine, she was gone. About a minute later, she returned, her features drawn in concentration as she pressed the ice to my ankle. She was so naturally gorgeous, it was almost hard to look at her this close. And if she bit that lip of hers one more time, I was seriously going to kiss her. Fuck the consequences. "How does that feel?" she asked, glancing up at me. "Better. You're beautiful," I blurted, and her cheeks coloured instantly. Great, now she was making me babble. She looked away, shyly, focusing back on the ice pack. "The pain must be making you delirious," she said quietly. "No, that's just you." "Actually, I'm completely lucid," I countered, and reached out to caress her cheek. She went utterly still, her breathing choppy, and I knew by the look she gave me that she was turned on. Without thinking, I asked a very, very stupid question. Do you want to fuck me, Leanne?
Five. Leanne.
Do you want to fuck me, Leanne?
Cal asked, and I swear to God I stopped breathing. I was kneeling in front of him, but all of a sudden he grabbed me by the hips and pulled me astride his lap. "This is a bad idea," I croaked as he ran both his hands up my spine to curl around my shoulders. His palms were warm as he started to dig his fingers into my tight muscles. I resisted the urge to moan.
Such a bad idea,
he agreed, leaning in to nip at my lower lip.
But let's do it anyway.
What about the agreement?
F the agreement,
he swore, his voice a husky rasp. Quick as a flash, he flipped us so I was on my back, legs spread wide as he nestled himself between my thighs. I could feel his pants stiffen, the length of his cock hardening against me, and swallowed down a gulp. This was actually happening. Ever since filming started, Cal had been testing my willpower with his subtle flirting and little touches. Sometimes he'd help me down off a wall, even though I was perfectly capable of getting down on my own. His hands on my waist would practically burn through the fabric of my clothes. Other times he'd get too hot and sweaty during a workout and pull off his top, revealing toned muscles and miles of inked skin. I'd become obsessed with memorizing all of his tattoos, from the Virgin Mary on his right arm that looked almost like stained glass, to the anchor that said Mum on his inner wrist, to the demon black skull that spanned the entire width of his shoulder blades. Every time I looked, I noticed something new. I stared into his eyes, imprisoned in their sea-green depths, and wondered how I even managed to last this long. He was too beautiful for words, and though he often enjoyed riling me, he was a good person. Flawed, yes, but still good. Cal was loyal to the ones who deserved it, but an all-around prick to those who didn't. I had to give him his props, though. At least he was brave enough to call people on their bullshit.
I think about you all the time,
he went on, and my breath caught again.
I dream about you. You're under my skin so much you might as well be one of these bloody tattoos.
He laughed, a sexy, intimate sound. It's a good thing you lost that bet, or I actually would be. His smile was affectionate.
You never did get your solar system.
Haven't found the right moment, I said and whimpered when he pushed his hips in so that his erection was flush against me. His hand cupped the back of my neck, fingers digging into the base of my skull and sending electric shocks all down my spine. My mouth opened on a gasp and his attention went to my lips. He stared at them with all the focus of a neurosurgeon when he bent forward to brush his mouth over mine, featherlight.
I'm gonna kiss you now.
Okay. I barely got the word out when he crushed his mouth to mine with a hunger that was startling. His tongue dove in, no preamble, and explored every inch of my mouth, sliding along my tongue all hot and wet. I moaned into the kiss and squirmed beneath him. His deep, rumbling groan set a fire low in my belly, and he reached down to slip his hand inside my workout shorts. He cupped me right between the legs, and I lost the ability to function. I simply lay there, allowing him to kiss and touch me, his fingers skilled and sure. When they dipped past the barrier of my underwear to touch me bare, my eyes rolled back in my skull. This was weeks of foreplay coming to fruition. Reluctant attraction finally finding an outlet. I needed him so bad I ached. More, I begged, gasping as I broke our kiss. His eyes were open, watching my every reaction while he fingered my clit. When I came, it was with a loud cry of pleasure that I barely managed to stifle. Something came over me as I fumbled for him, tugging up his shirt and practically yanking down his pants. We were all instinct, completely mindless for each other. I guess that's why you shouldn't deny yourself sexual pleasure when you want someone as badly as I wanted Cal, because then you did silly, stupid things in the heat of the moment. I gripped his firm, muscular arse as he positioned himself, then pushed inside me. His thrusts were hard and fast, and I was too lost in my need of him to even realize he wasn't wearing protection. I saw him experience the exact same moment of realization when he paused mid-thrust and stared into my eyes. Panic, horror, and apology all in a single look. I reached up to cup the side of his face and pulled his mouth down to mine. "It's okay, I'm on the pill," I reassured him, half of me knowing I was being reckless, and the other half too lost in pleasure to care. Besides, since meeting Cal, I'd never seen him with another girl, and we'd gone on nights out during filming. Sure, women flirted with him, but he never went home with anyone. Believe me, I noticed, and wondered. Was he just not the one-night stand type? Or was he too preoccupied with our weird connection to pay attention to other women?
Are you sure?
He asked, breathless. He looked so handsome and sexy right then. Strong arms braced as he held himself above me. I'd never been much of a submissive type, but I certainly didn't mind Cal being the one in charge. I pressed a soft kiss to his lips and whispered, "I'm sure." Those two little words were like a red rag to a bull. He pushed into me, building an impressive rhythm as I gasped for breath. I'd never had sex like this before, so passionate and reckless. Someone could walk into the gym at any moment. Luckily, they didn't. Cal came with a rough groan and buried his face in my neck. It was such an affectionate gesture that my heart gave a quick, lung-bashing thump that said, "Oh, Leanne, we're in so much trouble here." I stroked his hair away from my face as he wrapped his arms around my middle and held onto me tight. His eyes were closed, his breathing deep and content as he just lay there and held me. My brain was still scrambled by the sex when I felt him press a kiss to my neck and murmur,
"We should go get you that tattoo."
I arched a questioning brow. "What? Right now?" He smiled devilishly.
"No time like the present."
Before I knew it, we'd cleaned up and dressed. Cal dragged me from the gym and outside to his motorbike. He helped me on with the helmet, just like he had that night we went to his flat to check on his mum, foregoing his own safety to ensure mine. It was one of those little gestures that endeared me to him. "Just out of curiosity, how the hell can you afford this thing?" I asked, knowing the bike must have cost a pretty penny.
"Payment plan,"
he replied, like it was obvious. I chuckled. "I thought you might have some story about how you got it on the cheap and fixed it up. I like the idea of you in a greasy t-shirt working on an engine." He turned his head to me and reached out to give my thigh a light slap.
"I bet you do, you dirty bird."
I chuckled again and wrapped my arms around his middle as he started the engine and sped off. About 15 minutes later, we arrived at a tattoo parlor that looked like it was about ready to close for the evening. Cal led me inside, where there was a heavily tattooed bloke sweeping the floor. He was tall and muscled, and just looking at him made me nervous. I'd never been particularly scared of needles, but being faced with the immediate prospect of some intimidating, inked-up bloke repeatedly sticking one in my arm had me breaking out in a cold sweat. "Hey, Cal, how's it going? You're not in for a new piece already, are you?"
"Hey, Kev. No, actually, this is my friend Leanne. She wants to get her first tattoo, and I couldn't take her to anyone but the best."
Kev grinned at me with a gleam in his eye, like he enjoyed the prospect of untouched skin.
"Well, you've certainly brought her to the best.
What you got in mind, hon?" I gestured to my inner forearm. "I want to get the solar system here, but I have no idea about colours or style."
"Let's have you look at some artwork and see what you like then," Kev said,
motioning me over to a stack of folders. Almost an hour later, Kev had sketched an original piece for me and I was sitting down to get my very first tattoo. The needle was sharp and uncomfortably stingy at first, like it was dragging and pulling at my skin, but after a few minutes, it became bearable. Kev sat on one side of me, diligently working on my arm, while Cal sat on the other, taking it all in. I swear he was getting an odd sort of enjoyment out of this, though judging from the amount of ink he had to be just a little bit obsessed with tattoos. "Stop staring at me, you're making me nervous," I said, voice tight. Just because I'd gotten used to the needle didn't mean it didn't still hurt. Cal shot me a dreamy smile and suddenly I was back at the gym, under him, completely at his sexy mercy.
Can't help it. You're gorgeous.
"Shut up," I grumped, trying not to smile as Kev chuckled at our interaction. By the time he was done, I was a simmering pot of arousal, mostly from the way Cal watched the entire process, his attention going from the needle and to my body and then back to the needle. I stood and walked towards a full-length mirror, admiring Kev's handiwork. The tattoo was beautiful, even better than I could have imagined. It took my vision and surpassed all expectations. "It's amazing. Thank you so much," I said, smiling at Kev. He didn't seem half as intimidating now as when I'd first walked into the shop. I was busy reading through the care instructions and admiring my tattoo when I glanced up and saw Kev working on Cal's wrist. I'd been so engrossed in studying my new work of art that I hadn't even heard Cal asking Kev to tattoo him as well. It must have only been a small piece because he was almost done by the time I came over. "What did you get?" I asked, tilting my head to see. It was difficult to tell since Cal's arms already had so much ink. Kev sat back, all finished, allowing Cal to hold out his wrist to show me. My mouth fell open when I saw the tiny crown with a swirly L inside the design. My mind backtracked to the night of James's birthday and our bet, when I said if he lost, he had to get "Leanne is the queen of everything" tattooed on him. This wasn't exactly that, but it was still shocking. The L obviously stood for my name. What on earth was he thinking? "Is that?" I whispered, trailing off as he levelled me with a serious expression.
Today was important. I wanted a reminder,
Cal said, like it was no big deal. "Callum Davidson, there are plenty of ways to remind yourself of special days. You don't need to go and get someone's name tattooed on you. It's insane."
It's not your name, it's your initial. Besides, if you ever stab me in the back, I can easily get a cover-up.
"That's not the point." He arched a brow, lips twitching. He was clearly enjoying my fluster.
What's the point then, gorgeous?
"Don't call me that. You know it makes me weak."
That's funny, because you make me feel invincible.
I folded my arms and huffed a breath, while at the same time my heart did tiny somersaults. "Now you're just being silly." Cal stood from the bench and approached me. Kev was on the other side of the studio cleaning his instruments.
Leanne, believe me when I say this because I won't repeat myself. I think you're incredible. These last 2 months I've seen just how talented and funny and smart and brave you are. I'm literally in fucking awe of you. So, if I want to memorialize that awe with a tiny tattoo of a crown, then that's what I'm gonna do. He paused, smirking as he teased. Now get over yourself.
I shook my head, exasperated, irritated, and charmed all at once. "No, you get over yourself," I shot back grumpily. Cal chuckled, the sound low and sexy as he wrapped his arms around me and pulled me close.
Don't ever let anyone put you in charge of comebacks because you fail at them. Big time,
he said, all playful. I was about to disagree when he shut me up with a kiss, and I let out a soft, dreamy sigh. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I had a premonition our road would be a rocky one. But I pushed that thought aside for now and focused instead on his kiss. His kiss was better than jumping 15 feet to land in a perfect roll. It was better than a triple backflip performed in front of a captivated, adoring audience. His kiss was better than running on air.
This has been a Storytech production of Air Kiss, a running on air novella, written by L.H. Cosway, performed by Stacey Holmes and Will M. Watt. Copyright 2019 by L.H. Cosway. Production copyright 2019 by Storytech Limited.